All right, welcome, folks. My name is Dustin Jones, and you are watching or listening to the MMOA podcast. We are continuing our series on the MMOA DNA. What makes up an MMOA faculty? We've talked about, what is MMOA and what are we all about? And then in the last video, I talked about our first DNA characteristic of someone that is within MMOA, and that is that we are leaders. And we talked about what that actually looks like for us as faculty, particularly in our courses. Today, what we're going to talk about is the DNA trait of teacher. The next one will be on performer. So, teacher, let's talk about what it is to be a teacher within MMOA. There's three kind of main buckets or categories that we like to think about. Is that we are masters of the material, we are masters of delivery, and then we are masters of questions, of engaging and dialoguing. So, master of material, what does that mean? There are three main key points that we really focus on to ensure that our MOA faculty are masters of that particular material. One, and this is from Jeff Moore, the CEO of the Institute of Clinical Excellence, is that every faculty member, whatever section that they are going to be presenting, is that we're able to execute on the flawless five. The flawless five is where you get through the first 5 slides of your section or presentation without having to look at the TV. The flawless five, that you rip through those 5 slides without even having to reference anything on the screen. And what that does, it shows to your student that you know this material in and out. And when I'm able to demonstrate that in kind of a nonverbal manner, I'm able to show them that I know this stuff. That creates an amazing learning environment and a lot of trust with that student. They can sit back, relax, and enjoy the ride because they know that they're in good hands, that they are going to be on an experience with this individual that knows what they're talking about. And so we really emphasize that we know our material so we don't have to be looking at the screen, right? We've all seen kind of the opposite of this play out. I think back to several, college courses that I had where I was paying thousands of dollars to watch someone read off of a PowerPoint off of a screen, right? Why am I paying this money to do this when I could do this at home? And we don't want to do that. The way we like to think about our slides here at ICE is that they are not for us as presenters, they are for the students. The slides are not for us, they are for the students. And therefore, we should not need to reference the slides to have an idea of what is going to be, what we're going to talk about. So that's the first one. The second one is words before click. Words before click. We've all seen this happen, right? The presenter clicks and then they pause, peek, gather their thoughts, and then they say the thing, right? It is very clear that that person did not know what was ahead of that next click, and they had to reference that material, gather their thoughts, and then execute. That does not scream mastery whatsoever. Jeff Moore will call this the peek and pause, where they peek, they pause, they gather their thoughts, and then you keep going. The way we like to think about things is that we want to make sure that our words are transitioning into the next slide or topic point before we click, that we know what's ahead and we're speaking to what's ahead. And that is going to show that we know our stuff. And this means that you, the student, will trust us even more and create an optimal learning environment. All right. So the flawless five, we have words before click. And then every MOA faculty should be able to synthesize the reference, research, and the key points of that study that make it unique and worth knowing or understanding, right? We are an evidence-based division that we lean heavily on all the amazing evidence that has grown over decades in geriatric physical therapy, occupational therapy, strength and conditioning as well. And so we need to know some of these pivotal articles that have really challenged a lot of thoughts, a lot of biases, and to be able to portray clear points to you, the student, of why that white paper that Dale Avers wrote in 2009 was such a pivotal moment in geriatric physical therapy and challenged so many biases. Why Watkins and that crew down in Australia that published the Liftmore trial in 2008 that challenged a lot of people's perceptions of osteoporosis and what it means to really load bones, that we can actually improve bone mineral density and not necessarily injure individuals under high intensity loads. Some of these studies that we reference throughout our curriculum, we need to understand the actual studies and the properties of that study, but then also the context of that study and why that was such a big deal when it came out and what conversations that really created. we need to understand those key points. So that's the master of material. If we're able to do those three things, you're going to be able to demonstrate that you got the goods, that your student's going to be able to relax and enjoy the ride, which optimizes learning. Next is going to be master of delivery. This is a very valuable skill. There's three main components that we think about within mastering delivery. One is that we frame our sections. The classic, right? Tell them what you're going to tell them, and then tell them what you told them. The tell them what you're going to tell them part is really important, right? Because that prepares that person for what's ahead. It creates kind of a curious state of what is going to be ahead, but then also what benefits am I going to get as a result of spending my time listening to this person talk. I think it's important that we tell them what we're going to tell them, but we also tell them why. Why is this stuff important? Why should they remember it? Why should they pay attention to you for the next 40 to 50 minutes? Then we tell them the goods, right? We tell them the helpful information that's going to help them serve their patients. And then we tie it up with a nice little bow of telling them what we told them, highlighting those key points. If we're able to frame our sections, we're basically pouring nice foundation to be able to build on top of. You can also think of it as scaffolding, that we're building a beautiful scaffolding framework to allow all that information to stick to or to stack upon. If we frame our section, we're going to increase learning for that individual and them actually understanding and retaining that information. So that's number one. Number two is layering information. And this is a really important skill that we use a lot within our courses because we will have such a wide fluctuation of experience levels, of skill levels that will come to our courses. We will have, PT students, for example, that may not know a lot of this foundational material, but are just thirsty for knowledge. And then we've got veteran clinicians that are very fitness forward, that practice a lot of the stuff, that have been doing some of this stuff for many, many years. And so we need to be able to serve all of those people in our course. And the way we like to think about this is we move from simple introductory concepts, and then we progress toward more advanced concepts. It's very easy for a faculty member that sees the veteran clinician and think, all right, I need to give them the goods. I need to show them all the tricks that I have to be able to, share something new with that individual. The problem with that is when we start there, we end up doing a disservice to the vast majority of folks that are in the room. So we move from introductory to advanced as we give and apply information. So simple to complex is how we like to think about this. This is the concept of layering. One thing should build on top of another. So practically what that looks like is I don't come out guns a-blazing and showing all the high-level advanced techniques right out the gate. I will do that towards the end after we've established some fundamentals and common mutual understandings that we all need to have that makes those advanced high techniques, if you will, more applicable for everybody. All right. So think introductory to advanced. And then number third, in terms of master of delivery, especially in the context of MMOA, we do a lot of lab breakouts. We're managing a lot of people, and we are having to give a lot of instructions of what we're going to do next, do this, then that. And so that faculty member needs to provide digestible chunks of information and instruction, that we don't just want to word vomit on folks and give them 15 cues or things to do and then say, all right, go practice, right? Because how many of those are they actually going to remember? It's like whenever you, as a clinician, have taught a deadlift to a patient, right? Remember the first time you taught a deadlift, it may have been right after you learned this amazing movement that's relatively simple, but we managed to make a simple movement very complex by telling people 15 cues to think about on their first rep, right? And think of all the angst and how overwhelmed your patient was and how many of those cues they were actually able to execute on. Hardly any, right? Because you gave them absolutely everything you had. And so we want to think about that with our students as well, is that we want to provide digestible chunks of information, that we give time to process. We give space for questions. We make sure that we give space to kind of apply that particular information to different cases. In our course, we do that with our 3 avatars, Bill, Doris, and Anna, that represent different functional levels. We also think about this with instruction. When we're doing labs, for example, we may say, all right, partners, I want you to practice this and this. and go. They practice their thing, then they come back. All right, good job. Tie that up and then say, all right, now let's try this. I want you to practice this and this for X, Y, and Z. Boom, go. And so giving 2 to 3 things to practice on at each breakout ensures folks are actually going to practice that and not forget and then end up just kind of talking or checking their phone. We'll keep them engaged. So these digestible chunks of information and instruction are really important. And then last but not least, what a really good teacher does is that they are a master of questions. Master of questions. This is a very delicate area because it can go really right and it can go really wrong very, very quickly. I think the first thing that we think about is that we are intentionally creating a very humble and learning focused environment to where the faculty is not necessarily in this ivory tower above the students, that we are all in this together trying to move towards knowledge, that we create an environment that encourages questions, that we want to know what our students think, and that we use questions to kind of bring them to understanding and knowledge. That is really important to kind of set the tone. The quickest way to negate that or to create an environment where questions are not encouraged is to be disrespectful towards a student that asks a question or to not answer that question in a respectful or effective manner. And so we're very, very thoughtful about questions. The first thing that we do is that we ask for questions. So we make it clear that there's space for this. What questions do we have is what we will ask. We won't ask this at the end of a section. We ask this at the beginning of the next section, because at the end of the section, most folks know that they're about to have a break, right? And when you open up the floor to what questions do we have right before the break, most folks are not going to ask a question in that scenario because they know their question is the only thing between them and that refill of the coffee cup, or between them and going ahead and grabbing a snack. So we ask at the beginning of the next section. That also is giving folks a little bit more time to process, think about that material that they just went through, and then we'll likely ask a question and can generate a lot of good discussion. So what questions do we have? That's very different than do we have any questions, right? Do we have any questions is almost implying that, do any of you simple people not understand what I'm talking about? If so, I can go ahead and clear that up now. I don't necessarily want your questions, but we'll go ahead and make some space. What questions do we have is a more inviting manner. And then is also, there's an expectation that there are questions, that we want questions and we're willing to address them and we want to address them. So what questions do we have? Not the end, but the beginning of the next section. And then once we get that question, we acknowledge that person. Great question. And then we repeat the question to ensure everyone else heard it in the room and also that we understand it. If we don't understand the question, maybe ask to repeat or ask a clarifying question, because we don't want to give a response to something that we may not, the question that we may not truly understand. We then provide a logical response from our experience, from the available data, the evidence. We also maybe give the floor up to our teammates first to say, hey, do you have anything to add here? And we may open it up to the students as well, but we open up to our teammates before we would open up to our students. And then last but not least, if you don't know the answer to that question, say so. Say, that's a great question. I've never really thought about that, or I haven't digged in that area of research. You know what? I know where we can find it though. And I'll make a note and then we'll be sure to address that question and then actually follow up, right? This is where our teammates can be really helpful. If I'm teaching with someone else, I can say, hey, Ellen, would you mind writing that question down? Let's look that up at break and make sure we get back to Brittany there in the back corner. That's how we can handle that. And then we want to make sure it's mutual understanding and just further knowledge. So those are the big buckets related to how to be a great teacher within the context of MMOA. They need to be masters of material. What does that look like? They've got the flawless 5. They're letting their words lead into that next slide, not the click, and they understand that research. They also know how to deliver information very effectively. They frame their sections. Tell them what you're going to tell them. Tell them and then tell them what you told them. They know how to layer information from introductory to advanced to speak to all the people in the room, and they're giving digestible chunks of information and instruction so they're not losing folks. And then last but not least, they know how to handle questions like a boss. They make an inviting culture within the context of that course that really encourages questions. They ask, what questions do we have at the beginning of sections? And they thank people for their questions, because that's what really makes these courses worthwhile for many folks, when they can ask questions and apply it to their own situation. All right, y'all. So we've covered what is MMOA. We've covered the first DNA trait, which is a leader. This was the second DNA trait, which is teacher. The next DNA trait that we're going to talk about is a performer. Yes, that is right. We are educators. We are in the con ed space, but we're also in the performer space as well. All right, I'm excited to talk to y'all about that one. Have a good one.